Stop at Sioux City, Fairfield, Actonville, Dayton. Train now boarding, Martinez.
Captain Water Train 534 heading to Sioux City. Bill Davis in Sacramento. This will be your last call for Martinez.
Oh no, it doesn't have a table. But it's got faces.
Oh man, I have to face them?
Yeah.
Is God.
I know you aren't traveling
This
together.
Job
You never seen each
14
other
passage
before in
that
your
is meant
lives,
to
but
hand wave the Hezekiah passage about God adding
it's
years
an
to his life
opportunity. You
is
know?
about man's natural limits in himself and the brevity of life that God has determined
know that
certain
still works
natural
when you're
limits
done
for us that we do not go beyond. That's obvious to all of us as we live in our deaths and so on. It's not saying
yeah,
that
it
every
is.
man's days are
You gotta have your
determined.
sea legs up here.
So you can't hand wave the Hezekiah passage which says, I will add 13 years to your life with this. Additionally, in Numbers 23, this Balaam passage, so the false prophet, he's only pointing to God's immutability as it relates to his truthfulness when he says God's not a man who changes his mind, especially when he makes an unconditional promise against Israel. God cannot lie, defining of his omnipotence, nor can he change his mind about something he promised. Additionally, so God's made this promise and he's not going to change that. This is not a passage that you can use to sweep all the other passages under the rug. Jerry's argument was essentially, if God changes his mind, then that would make me afraid and sad, so it can't possibly be the truth. He wouldn't accept that argument from me. God determines all things, and that will make me afraid, and that will make me sad, so he can't. So why should he accept that? Especially in Joel 2:13, I believe it is, it describes God's character as someone who is faithful and who relents from sending disaster. In Jonah, we see this repeated again. God relenting from sending disaster is described as who God is. 11 passage that works doesn't necessarily mean determines. It does kind of seem to mean that more in the syntactical context. But if it doesn't mean determines, then why use this as a proof text for determinism? The context makes a lot more sense that God is working out all things according to what he wants to work out. It doesn't mean that he causes or determines sin. You have to read that. How God predestining in this passage, the action is upon believers, not upon all things. At one stage, Jerry said, here are the facts, and then God lays out the facts, and I believe we were talking at that stage about Hezekiah when he says, you will not recover. If he's laying out the facts, you will not recover, and he doesn't change his mind, and he's not changing his mind for Hezekiah's life, then what is God doing here except Hezekiah to pray? It doesn't fit with determinism. This Isaiah 46 passage is declared from ancient times. This is supposed to mean that God's declaring into some timeless void of no one. It doesn't make sense in the context. That's not what this passage is about. You've seen the consequences of denying, of the Corinthians 10:13, where you can't tell someone after they've sinned that given their history and their current circumstances and their desires that they could have done differently, you have to tell them that God predestined the sin and that God planned it for his glory. I don't think that's what Ephesians 1, that 1 Corinthians 10:13 is saying. It's saying that God is being faithful to provide a way. Jerry really gave us a clear answer on what that passage is saying on his view, except to just assert conditional ability, which is really hypothetical, saying that if God had decreed differently, you would have done differently. That.
Thank you, Drew Mack. Those concluding statements go by quick. And gentlemen, I gotta say, that was an excellent debate. You both did a good job. That was engaging. We went back and forth on a lot of interesting topics. And so you guys are a couple of true professionals. Jerry and Drew, we've got some great audience questions here to engage. And so what we'll do, and then it would go back to Drew for a final word. So whoever the question's for gets the final word. All right, gentlemen, let's start at the beginning. And we've got Gulfside Ministry. Witchy antecedent / consequent QDP 23.2, or can God, another reference here from Aquinas, if yes, does this address deterministic passages? Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I don't know. I hate that he spent that money and I can't answer. Can God will the contingent things? I mean, his decree does involve contingent things. Like like God decreed that if I wanted.
Make it timeless.
As the head of the health department there has confirmed the cause of death for Pope Francis, a cerebral stroke that led to a coma and later heart failure. Francis died earlier today, just a day after Easter at the age of 88. Pope Francis became Pope in 2013 and was the Church's first Latin American pontiff and the first Jesuit Pope.
It's obvious, right? Since 80s, almost 90s, it's gonna die.
Francis was the first pope, as I mentioned, from Latin America, who helped to make the Catholic Church more inclusive. He was also known for his focus on the poor and the marginalized.
Rebecca Castor is in Washington with more.
And also being a pedo sympathizer.
On his final moments and the legacy he leaves behind.
Here at the nation's largest basilica, the black drapes are drawn to honor the life and legacy of Pope Francis.
Yeah, it did a lot of good. They just a total piece of shit like most.
Thousands of mourners gathering in St. Peter's Square for a rosary prayer vigil, honoring the Holy Father.
We heard about it when we came in here, and yeah, it's pretty much devastated all of us.
The Pope
They just had to throw an Indian dude in there just to make it inclusive.
Pope's body
Some DEI shit right there.
he was placed in a coffin during a ceremony attended by church officials. Next, he'll be transferred to St. Peter's Basilica as early as Wednesday for worshipers to pay their respects.
He's also a father for us, someone who cares for us, someone who represents.
Cheers Sunday as he made his way through St.
I guess they were trying to film the crowd, but why would some cameraman be filming the back of his head? That was just ridiculous.
Peter's Square, waving to the crowd from the Pope Mobile. It was his first public appearance since leaving the hospital in March following a bout with double pneumonia. From the balcony of the Basilica, the Pope gave an Easter blessing while an aide read his prepared address. It focused on peace and called for an end to conflicts, particularly in Gaza and Ukraine.
He wanted to come back home. He wanted to be with the people, and God granted him that special blessing.
Earlier that morning, the Pope had a brief meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, who converted to Catholicism in 2019. Vance told the pontiff that he prays for him daily, and Francis gifted him chocolate Easter eggs for his children.
We're praying for the millions of Christians around the world.
Papal quarters in favor of a more modest residence at the Vatican. He was also considered progressive after decades of conservative leadership. He worked to make the church more welcoming and inclusive, passionate approach towards the LGBTQ community, famously saying, "Who am I to judge?" when asked about the sexual orientation of priests.
In his simplicity, in his humility, in his easygoingness. These were.
They're probably talking about the fucking little boys.
These were gifts that he stewarded so well.
As an example of his humility, Pope Francis simplified the funeral protocols for popes before his death. It's likely he'll be laid to rest within the week. At Catholic University in Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox 32 Chicago.
President Trump, meanwhile, ordering flags to be flown at half-staff as a, quote, mark of respect for the memory of Pope Francis.
That's not how that works at all.
President also offering condolences via Truth Social, writing, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him."
You can tell the Pope didn't even like him. Like, get the fuck out of my office, bro.
President Trump and First Lady Melania meeting Pope Francis at the Vatican back in 2017 during the president's first term. And as you just heard from Rebecca Castor, Vice President J.D. Vance met with Francis at the Vatican yesterday, posted social media saying, "My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world."
In September 2015, Pope Francis became only the third pontiff in history to pay a visit to the White House. He was greeted by the former President Barack Obama and the First Family, and then Vice President Joe Biden and his family were also on the tarmac upon his arrival. And here's the video from that. And Biden remembered the Pope as, quote, unlike any who came before him, and says Francis will be remembered as among the most consequential leaders of our time. The Obamas called Francis a rare leader who made us want to be better people. And they wrote, in his humility and his gestures at once simple and profound, embracing the sick, ministering to the homeless, washing the feet of young prisoners, he shook us out of our complacency and reminded us that we are all bound by moral obligations to God. Vacante period, the giant bronze doors to the Apostolic Palace are half closed and bells are rung. And during this time, visitors can still...
I remember, like, I feel like I remember not long ago, like before this guy got in, obviously, and it's just...
Humility and removing home for his final resting place. This was one of his favorite and most frequented churches. Francis will be the first pope in a century to be interred. Pope won't be placed on an elevated platform in St. Peter's Basilica during the public viewing. Instead, his body and those of future popes will lie in state in a simple coffin. And just announced, President Trump says he and First Lady Melania Trump, president, to attend a pontiff's funeral that was for John Paul II in the year 2005.
Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the Vatican's Camerlengo, will now oversee the... Schlump joining us now. Heidi, always good to see you, although not under these circumstances. Pope Francis, as you know, was a reformer. He was, by Vatican standards, unpredictable. How would you sum up his legacy?
Well,
ineffectual. He was just kind of, I mean, he talked to...
It was really inspirational. So for his death, now to bring an end to his papacy is a very sad day for so many people.
It really is. And I remember when we chose Pope Francis. So tell us again about the process. How
basically the dudes are gonna, have a circle jerk. They're gonna decide to take place there. They have to pretend that they have what's going on? Politics, that's what's going on.
Celebrating the life of Pope Francis through the funeral services that you mentioned that I expect will happen probably by the end of this week.
Is going to take his place long before this.
Even those who are too old to vote in the conclave will have a chance to get up and give interventions or speeches in which they can share their thoughts about what's needed in a new leader. And then
So a bunch of white dudes are going to sit around and talk about it. And
watch the movie Conclave. Rituals that happen in the Sistine Chapel.
There's no secret rituals. They're just getting drunk and bantering.
Where the vote.
When we elected the last.
Not that much, no. I mean, it's.
The church as well as everyday Catholics are very concerned about. In the U.S. church who were not happy with the direction he was taking the church, who thought
because they're a bunch of MAGA idiots,
that he was bringing confusion or going too far in a liberal. Under 80 to be voting, and I.
Okay, my mistake. There's like actually an Asian and two black guys, I think, in this pool. This game of Hollywood Squares or whatever.
I do believe that the range of people who have been named cardinals under than we haven't had before. So
is that Nelson Mandela top right?
Number of cardinals from Europe and North America have declined under the Francis papacy, whereas other parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, have increased. Now, whether that will translate into a likely that we would have another pope from the Western Hemisphere, although it's done in secret, so we won't know unless there are leaks exactly what happens there. Certainly, the U.S. Church is influential and has a fair amount of money in their influence, but I would be very surprised.
Thanks for riding. Please watch your step.
I did just have to Google rapacious, and while it doesn't mean exactly what I thought it meant, it is still accurate in this context.
If there was a pope from the United States, let's put it that way.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much. Thank you for spending the time and explaining all of this to us.
Okay, thank you so much.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Well, Cardinal Blaise Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago, says he will attend the Pope's funeral and serve as part of the papal conclave. Cupich is one of 3 influential American bishops with ties to Chicago that will participate. The others are Chicago-born.
Nobody cares. You're going to help. You just stop and stare.
Service remaining stops in Davis and Sacramento.
You've got an island for a iPhone. It's right here. Was that our Mercedes?
Last call for Fairfield Backville.
So nice of them to actually stop and help. This person is just exceedingly stupid, though.
They're waterproof.
Probably have.
They're recording and shit. Yeah. You mean for like insurance and stuff? No, because we were only here.
The car didn't get stuck in the ocean. They parked on the beach like a couple dumbasses.
An hour and this happened.
And waited for the tide to roll in. Sick.
Did you just take a walk and you came back and it was there? Never had the phone.
Welcome to everyone that joined us in Fairfield, Vacaville, Sioux City. Please have your tickets out and ready for collection. Conductors are passing through. Next station stop is Davis. Davis up next.
Wow! There we go! Woo!
Congratulations. All right. See you later.